Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Just Jordan Show. I'm your host Jordan, and in today's episode I wanted to talk about movies that were released in the 70s. Now, as you well know throughout my previous episodes, I really enjoy watching a wide range of movies, and the 70s brought us a wide range of movies indeed. And I wanted to talk about a few of them today. Now, this probably will be a series that I'd like to do, going through each decade. So starting off with the 70s and then 80s, 90s, noughties, 10s, and then what we've had so far in the 20s. I was going to do the 60s, but then it will mainly just be James Bond movies. And I thought, why talk about James Bond movies when I can just talk about a wide range of movies if I start off with the 70s. So without further ado, let's just go through a couple of them that I've watched personally, and I've also included on the list some movies that I haven't watched, but I would like to watch in the future that I know are quite rated from the 70s. Now, obviously, I'm going to miss off loads of different movies here, so these are just ones that have come straight to the forefront of my brain. Let's start off with Rocky. Now, Rocky was a movie that was released in 1976, starring Sylvester Stallone. It was probably, I would assume it was Sylvester Stallone's breakout film. I think he had done movies prior to that, but then Rocky was like his big hit. Yeah, and then obviously that spawned many sequels since. I think there is 6 movies in the Rocky series, and I think there's 2 movies in the Creed series. So yeah, it spawned a massive array of movies. Another movie that was released in the 70s was Alien. Now, this was like a sci-fi horror movie, more so horror than sci-fi. Obviously, it had sci-fi elements in it, but Aliens, which was the sequel, was more sci-fi action horror rather than just horror. But yeah, Alien is a very good movie, directed by Ridley Scott, who also then directed its later movies that came out in the 2000s and 2010s. But yes, the movie Alien is a very good movie. If you haven't watched it, it's a good horror. It's quite a long horror movie as horror movies go, but yeah, it's a decent watch. I would definitely recommend watching that. Another horror movie that I've spoken of already on this channel, which came out in the 70s, was Halloween. Halloween 1978 came out in cinemas, and yeah, it's I've already spoken about it in length, well, short form. I don't know what you would class the length of that episode was, but yeah, it was a very decent. It's probably my favourite horror movie, and yeah, that was also released in the 70s. Now, one movie that I haven't watched that a lot of people I've spoken to have watched and said it's a very good moving movie is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, it's starring Jack Nicholson. It was released in 1975. I've not watched it myself, but I've heard it's based off like a novel, and then obviously it's been brought to cinema. But yeah, it's definitely a movie that's in my list of many movies I need to watch that are regarded as classics. But yeah, the 70s has got such a wide range of movies. It's gone from like sports, a movie based in sports with Rocky. Then you go to horror movies, and then you go into more realism movies like the one I'm about to speak about, Taxi Driver. Now, I only watched this recently, probably during the lockdown, and yeah, it stars Robert De Niro and Jodie Foster, and yeah, it's a very good movie. It's a bit of a hard one to follow, really. Like, I think you have to watch it more than once. I've only watched it once, and I did finish the movie and I thought, ooh, there's probably some hidden messages in this movie that I've not picked up on. But yeah, it's a very good movie if you haven't watched it. I don't think it's too long, so it's not going to be one that you're going to have to sit through and then get to the end and not really understand what happened. You could probably just watch it again a month later and then pick it up more so than you would the first time you watched it. But yes, there's 2 movies that I've left until to speak of last, and there's a couple of movies in between that obviously I was going to speak about, but I've already spoken about them, or I would like to go into more depth of them in a different episode. But like, for example, the Star Wars movies, obviously A New Hope was released in 1977, which obviously, in my opinion, changed the game of cinema, in terms of the special effects, in terms of how science fiction movies were shown, how much of a cultural impact it could have on the world. And obviously there was some James Bond movies within the 70s, one of them being Spy Who Loved Me, which is one of my favourite James Bond movies, which was released in 1979, I think, 77. I should know these. I like to 77 I'm gonna go with, yeah, because Spy Who Loved Me was 77, Moonraker was 79. There we go. I like to remember all them dates, just for my own personal satisfaction, I suppose. But yeah, I was going to talk about their movies a bit more so, but obviously I've already A, spoken about them, and B, I can always go back to them and speak about them in more detail individually. Now, the two movies that I mentioned that I'm going to leave to the end, which we have now got to, is the Godfather movies. Now, if I had to make my top 5 list of movies of all time for all decades, blah, 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 The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, it's very difficult which one you would pick, but one of them two would be in my top 5 movies of all time. It's simple as that. They're masterpieces, in my opinion. I think the lowest I could rate either movie is probably a 9. So that shows how good they are. And I think one of them's probably a 9, and one of them's either 9.5, or one's a 9.5 and one's a 10, because the acting, the direction, or obviously the length of the movies, a lot of people go, oh God, they're long, but just stick with it, it's fantastic. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola. I don't know who wrote the book. That's going to annoy me, but I can't remember. Obviously, the lead actor in The Godfather, who plays Don Corleone, is also eluding me at the moment. Marlon Brando, there we go. It's come straight back to my head. See, I just pluck information out of my head. All of a sudden, I think of something, and I'm like, oh yes, it's that. And then obviously, then Al Pacino becomes the Godfather towards the tail end of the first movie, and then is the Godfather in Godfather Part 2. The Godfather was released in 1972, and then the follow-up movie was in 1974. Now, like the mobster gangster movies, I will probably do my own video on them type of genre of movies, because I do like talking about them. I think, The Godfather was probably the number one. I'd put Goodfellas up there as well, because that's just such a good movie as well. I think that is also directed by Martin Scorsese, so he also did Taxi Driver. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but yes, Martin Scorsese did Taxi Driver and The Godfather. I believe he done. I'm just going to double check that. I believe he did. I am pretty sure he did. Yes, he did. Just shaking the camera there. Yes, Martin Scorsese did direct Taxi Driver and also Goodfellas. So yeah, a lot of good Martin Scorsese movies. If you need a certain director to follow, Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, James Cameron, you can't really go wrong. All of their movies, fantastic. So yeah, the 70s. If I had to sum it up, I would say it was adventurous. It took on loads of different forms. Obviously, like I said when I started this video, there is so many movies that I've probably missed off this list. But yeah, I think it was a very a good mixture of movies. You could go from a horror to a more realistic movie to a more a futuristic, unrealistic movie. You could go to outer space with Star Wars. You could stay with James Bonds that you had in the 60s, with obviously Sean Connery still being Bond up until obviously Diamonds Are Forever, and then Roger Moore took the mantle. Yeah, I think the 70s was one of the better decades. I think if I went through 70s, 80s, noughties, 10s, 20s, I think I'd have to then make my decision on which decade had the best movies, but the 70s had some phenomenal movies, and I would probably say it has at least 2 or 3 movies that are in my top 10 movies of all time within this decade. So I think that just goes to show how important the 70s was to cinema, especially with sci-fi, when you look at the movies like Alien and you look at movies like Star Wars. But yeah, that will be it for this episode. I am very pleased to announce that the next episode of the podcast, which will be hopefully dropping on Saturday, I will be doing it with a guest for the first time. Me and my friend Joshua Patch. or Josh Patch, or just Patch, will be joining me. And we'll be talking about numerous things. I imagine we'll get into a topic of football, maybe his personal favourite movies, anything and everything will be discussed. And I hope everyone can, join us and listen to us chat for a half hour, an hour. I don't know how long we're going to talk for, probably until we both run out of things to talk about. But thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, drop it a like, and why not subscribe? That does help, really does help, liking and subscribing, and commenting as well. I haven't had really many comments on my videos, which obviously isn't a bad thing. Yeah, but it's nice to know if someone does like it or doesn't like it, or probably might want to say, "Oh, George, you missed off, talking about this movie or this particular program or video game," or whatever I'm talking about at the time. So the more discussion, the better, because then I can then make the videos better for you, the viewers. So with enough of me rambling, I'm going to go now. But hope I see you in the next episode on Saturday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.